before we dive into this exciting story, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe and share this video with anyone who loves epic space adventures. Your support helps us keep exploring the galaxy one story at a time. And let us know in the comments, what kind of stories do you enjoy the most? We'd love to hear from you, and we'll make more videos just like the ones you love. The enemy fleet had gathered in the black expanse of space, their ships lined up in perfect formation, each one a testament to their power. They had spent years planning this moment, strategizing every move, calculating their attacks with precision. It had been a long and grueling war, but now it seemed they had finally won. The human race, once proud and defiant, was all but defeated. The enemy commanders stood at the helm of their flagship, watching as the enemy fleet prepared for its final assault on Earth. The screens in front of them displayed the devastation they had caused. Planets and moons reduced to rubble, human colonies wiped off the map, and Earth's defenses weakened with every passing moment. Yet, despite all their success, despite all the destruction they had wrought, there was a strange unease in the air. The fleet was celebrating their victory, but there was something that felt off. The humans had been resilient, yes, but they had no chance of winning now, not after everything they had endured. So why did it feel like something was coming, something unexpected? The silence of space was broken by the sharp crackle of a transmission coming through. The enemy commanders glanced at the comms officer, who quickly activated the channel. It was a simple message, but it was clear. "We are humans. We are coming." The words hit the commanders like a slap to the face. The humans coming, but they had already been defeated. They were finished. There was no way the humans had anything left to fight back, or so they thought. "Is this a joke?" one of the commanders asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. He leaned closer to the comms officer station. "Run a full analysis of the transmission. This must be a trick." The comms officer nodded quickly, typing rapidly into the console. After a few moments, turned toward the commanders. "It's not a joke, sir. The transmission is coming from human space. It's not a pre-recorded message either. They're broadcasting in real time." A murmur of confusion spread among the enemy commanders. They had crushed the human military. Earth was all but a burnt-out shell of its former self. There was no way they could have rebuilt. There was no way they could still have a fleet to challenge them. Yet, here was this message, cryptic and ominous, coming from deep within human territory. "Prepare for countermeasures," the fleet commander ordered, his voice cold and calculating. "It's probably a desperate attempt to bluff us, but we cannot be caught off guard. We have to end this once and for all." The ships in the enemy fleet began to shift into battle positions. They had the upper hand. They always did. The human resistance was nothing more than a fleeting nuisance at this point. With Earth crippled and their primary fleet scattered, there was no force left to oppose them. But the message kept echoing in their minds. "We are coming." Who was this? What could they possibly mean? And why did the transmission carry so much weight? It was almost as if the humans had known something, as if they had a plan, a strategy they hadn't shown yet. Aboard the human ship, the Aegis, the crew was silent. Kira stood at the front of the command center, her fingers lightly brushing against the cool metal of the console in front of her. The Aegis was a battle-worn ship, torn and damaged after years of relentless warfare, but still, standing strong. Despite everything, it was still the last symbol of humanity's strength. She had heard the transmission too, the message that had sent a chill down her spine. The enemy thought they had already won. They thought humanity was broken, scattered, and beaten, but they were wrong. "We are coming." Kira wasn't sure what it meant yet, but she felt it deep in her bones. This was humanity's final chance, their last card to play, and this time, they were going to take the enemy by surprise. Her crew had been working tirelessly to rebuild their forces, using scraps and whatever technology they could salvage. The ships they had left were old and outgunned, but they were fierce. And when the humans finally made their move, they were going to do so with everything they had left. "Captain, the fleet is ready." Noah, the communications officer, called out from behind her. Kira turned around, locking eyes with him. "Then let's give them something they'll never forget," she replied. Meanwhile, on the enemy flagship, the situation was growing tense. The enemy fleet had positioned itself in front of Earth's remaining defenses, preparing to launch the final assault that would wipe humanity from the galaxy. The celebrations of their victory had turned into murmurs of confusion, and their confidence wavered. "The humans can't possibly be preparing to fight back," the enemy commander muttered, pacing in front of the strategy board. They have no fleet, no forces left. We've decimated everything they had. But despite his words, doubt was beginning to creep into his mind. The transmission still echoed in his thoughts. We are coming. He turned to his tactical officers. What's the status on our long-range scans? We're picking up faint signals, but they're too weak to be confirmed as military vessels, sir. One of the officers replied, his voice laced with uncertainty. It's possible they've gathered scattered remnants of their forces, but there's nothing conclusive. The commander stared at the readouts, his mind racing. Keep an eye on those signals, and prepare for the worst. If humanity dares to rise up again, we'll crush them for good. The hours passed, and the enemy fleet tightened its grip around Earth's orbit, ready to launch their final assault. The countdown to their strike began, the enemy commanders confident that it would be a clean sweep. Their celebrations had only been delayed, not stopped. They were unstoppable now. The humans had no chance left. But as the countdown continued, something happened. The faint signals from human space grew stronger. The transmission that had first echoed through the enemy fleet's comm system became clearer, its message more insistent. The humans were preparing to do something. Kira watched the enemy fleet on her display. She knew they were close. She knew the enemy was just waiting for the right moment to strike, to finish them off once and for all. But she had one advantage. She knew they underestimated humanity. She knew they didn't understand the depth of human resilience, of the will to survive no matter the cost. The enemy commander's voice crackled through the comm system again. We are coming, humans, and this time, we'll finish what we started. But this time, Kira wasn't afraid. Let's show them what we're really capable of, she whispered, her voice full of resolve. The Aegis shifted into motion, and Kira's hands flew over the controls. This wasn't a battle she had chosen, but it was one she was going to win. Humanity would not go out quietly. They would rise up and fight, not just for survival, but for everything they stood for. The Aegis powered up, its engines humming with newfound life as the crew scrambled to engage their remaining weapons. The enemy fleet was vast, but Kira had one advantage. She had the element of surprise. The battle was about to begin, and humanity was finally ready to make its move. What do you think will happen next? Will Kira and her crew be able to turn the tide of the war against the powerful enemy fleet? How will humanity rise from the ashes of defeat? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who loves epic sci-fi adventures. We'll keep bringing you more stories that you love. The ship rocked violently as the blast from the enemy fleet hit their shields. Kira gripped the armrest of her command chair, her knuckles turning white. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. The enemy fleet was attacking in full force, confident in their superiority. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were going to learn why that was a dangerous mistake. Status report. Kira barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. Shields holding at 40%, Captain Avery. The weapons officer responded quickly. We're taking heavy fire, but we can withstand it. For now. Kira's mind raced. The Aegis wasn't equipped to take on an entire fleet, especially one as advanced as the enemy's. Their weapons systems were outdated, their ships patched together with whatever they could salvage. But there was one thing humanity still had: heart. And Kira would be damned if she let that be the thing that stopped them. Avery, return fire. Kira ordered. Concentrate on the lead ship. We need to take out their command vessel first. The Aegis's cannons fired back with precision, sending bursts of energy at the lead enemy ship. It rocked under the blast, but the shields held. The enemy fleet was too large, too powerful. The Aegis could fight back, but Kira knew they were at a severe disadvantage. Captain, Noah said, his voice calm but filled with urgency. We can't keep this up much longer. They're overwhelming us. Kira's mind raced as she thought of a plan. They needed to outthink the enemy, not outgun them. The Aegis had the advantage of agility, something the enemy fleet lacked. She looked at Noah. Can you get us into their fleet's blind spot? Noah hesitated, glancing at the enemy ships that were closing in fast. It's risky, but I can try. Do it, Kira ordered. Get us into position. We've only got one chance. As Noah worked the controls, the Aegis maneuvered between the enemy ships, its hull creaking under the strain. The enemy didn't expect the Aegis to dodge their attacks so easily, and for a moment, they seemed unsure of what to do. That hesitation was all Kira needed. The Aegis slipped into the blind spot of the lead enemy ship, its weapons targeting the vulnerable areas of their shields. Kira's heart raced as she watched the targeting system lock onto the weak points. This was their chance. This was their chance. All hands, brace for impact. Kira shouted. Full power to the weapons. The Aegis fired everything it had, sending a concentrated blast at the enemy ship. The energy burst hit its weak points, and the lead vessel's shields flickered before finally collapsing. The ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, its remnants scattering across space. For a moment, everything was silent. Kira let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The first victory was theirs, but it was only the beginning. The rest of the enemy fleet was still out there, and they weren't going to give up easily. Captain, the enemy is regrouping, Avery reported. They're going to launch a counteroffensive. Kira stood, her mind still focused on the battle. The Aegis had landed a solid blow, but it wasn't enough to end this fight. Not yet. We can't afford to get complacent, she said, her voice low. Prepare for another round of attacks. We've got to keep them on the back foot. On the enemy flagship, the commanders watched in disbelief as their lead ship was destroyed. The shockwaves from the explosion rippled through their fleet, causing brief moments of disarray. The humans were more resilient than they had thought, more resourceful than they had ever imagined. This is impossible, one of the commanders said, his voice trembling with shock. We've destroyed their colonies, their fleets, their armies. How can they still be fighting? The lead commander turned to him, his face dark with anger. Underestimate them at your own peril, he growled. These humans, they never give up, and that's what makes them dangerous. He turned back to the tactical map, his eyes narrowing. Prepare to launch a counterattack. We'll crush them. They think they have the upper hand, but they haven't seen what we're really capable of. The battle continued for hours, both sides trading blows, neither willing to back down. The Aegis fought with everything it had, but Kira knew they couldn't keep this up forever. The enemy fleet was vast, and they had more resources, more power. But Kira wasn't about to let them win. Not while she still had breath in her lungs. Captain, Noah said, his voice tight with anxiety. We're running low on energy reserves. We can't sustain these evasive maneuvers much longer. Kira's mind raced. They had to end this soon. She glanced at the enemy fleet, calculating their movements, their weaknesses. There was only one way this was going to end. On humanity's terms. Prepare for a direct assault, she said, her voice firm. We'll go in close and hit them with everything we've got. No more games. It's time to end this. The crew looked at each other, a mixture of fear and determination in their eyes. They knew what this meant. It was all or nothing. They had to break through the enemy's defenses, or they would be wiped out. Captain, are you sure? Avery asked. This is a dangerous move. We'll be in their range with no chance of retreat. Kira nodded, her eyes hard. If we don't take this chance, we'll lose everything. This is the only way. The Aegis powered forward, its engines pushing them toward the heart of the enemy fleet. The enemy commanders watched in disbelief as the human ship closed in. They were insane. Did they really think they could survive this? The Aegis was outgunned, outmanned. But as they watched the ship move into position, something clicked. They're planning something, the enemy commander muttered. Prepare to engage them at maximum range. Fire on my command. But it was too late. The Aegis had already made its move. Now, Kira shouted. The Aegis released a barrage of concentrated energy blasts, hitting the enemy ships with pinpoint accuracy. The enemy's shields faltered, their ships rocked by the force of the blasts. For a moment, it seemed like the tide had turned. The Aegis was winning, but then, something unexpected happened. The Aegis's systems flared, and an alarm blared through the ship. Captain, we've been hit. Avery shouted, her voice laced with panic. Hull integrity is failing. Kira's heart skipped a beat. The Aegis had taken too much damage. They were too close. They had pushed too far. Noah, Kira shouted. What's happening? Noah was typing furiously into the console, trying to regain control of the ship's systems. We're losing power. The enemy's counterattack damaged our reactors. We're not going to make it. Kira gritted her teeth. We have to make it, she said, determination in her voice. Give me something, Noah. We can't let them win. Noah looked up, his face pale but resolute. I can't promise we'll survive this, but I can try to overload the engines. It might buy us enough time to disable their command vessel. Do it, Kira ordered. Noah's fingers moved quickly over the console, and the ship trembled as the energy systems began to overload. It's going to be close, Noah said, his voice strained. Kira took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the bridge. The crew was tense, waiting for her. "Command, prepare for the final push," she said. "We're not losing today. What do you think will happen next? Will Kira and her crew make it out alive? Can humanity turn the tide against the enemy's overwhelming force? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who loves epic sci-fi adventures. Keep following us for more exciting stories. This one is just getting started. The Aegis shuddered violently as the last of its energy reserves sputtered out. The overload had worked, but at what cost? The ship's lights flickered, and alarms blared, filling the bridge with a cacophony of warning signals. Kira's hands gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles white. She had hoped the final push would disable the enemy command ship, but now the Aegis was barely holding together. The hull groaned under the strain, and the view from the bridge showed the enemy fleet circling like sharks, sensing the weakness. "Captain, we've lost communication with the outer decks," Avery reported, her voice tight with anxiety. "There's too much damage. Systems are failing across the board." Kira could hear the panic in Avery's voice. She didn't blame her. Things were looking dire. They had one chance left. If they didn't take down the command ship now, they wouldn't survive another round. The Aegis was crippled, and the crew was running out of options. She looked over at Noah, who was frantically trying to stabilize the systems. His face was drawn, sweat beading on his forehead. "How much time do we have left?" Kira asked, her voice a steady force, even though her heart was racing. "Not long, Captain," Noah answered, his eyes fixed on the flickering monitors. "We're not going to make it if we don't finish this now." Kira stood up, moving towards the viewport and gazing out at the enemy fleet. Her mind raced, searching for a way out of this. A way to defeat the seemingly invincible enemy that was now surrounding them. There was no time for second-guessing. The humans had fought tooth and nail to get to this point, and Kira wouldn't let their sacrifice go to waste. She knew what had to be done. "Prepare for a final strike," she said, her voice low and commanding. "Captain," Avery asked, confused, "we're almost out of power. How can we launch another attack?" Kira turned to her with a grim look in her eyes. "We don't need power for this. We need brains. We need to outthink them." She turned back to the viewport, her gaze never leaving the enemy ships that were slowly closing in. The enemy had made the mistake of thinking they were invincible. They had underestimated humanity, and now Kira was going to use that against them. "Noah, get me everything you can from the enemy fleet's sensors," she ordered. "We need their weakness. Find something, anything." Noah's fingers flew across the console as he accessed the enemy's data streams. The seconds seemed to stretch out as Kira stood, waiting. Finally, Noah's voice broke through the tension. "I've got something," Noah said, his eyes widening in disbelief. "There's a blind spot in their fleet's formation, a gap in their defense systems. They're not protecting one of their flagships' flanks. If we can get in there, we might be able to disable their main weapon systems." Kira's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the opportunity they needed. "We can do this," she said, turning to the crew. "We hit them fast and hard, before they can react. If we do it right, we'll cripple their fleet." Avery nodded, her eyes focused. "I'll make sure we get there, Captain, but it's going to be tight." Noah looked up from his console, determination flashing in his eyes. "I'll override their systems to make sure we're not detected until we're too close. If we time it right, they won't know what hit them." Kira took a deep breath. This was their last shot. They were running on fumes, and if they didn't succeed now, they would be done. But there was no turning back. "Do it," she commanded. The Aegis lurched forward, its engine sputtering but still alive enough to get them moving. The bridge crew braced for impact as they navigated their way through the chaos of the enemy fleet. Kira could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on her. There was no room for failure. They had come this far, and she couldn't let it all be for nothing. "We're approaching the gap," Avery said, her voice steady but taut. "Hold on, Captain." The Aegis darted between the enemy ships, weaving in and out of their line of fire. The enemy hadn't noticed them yet. The sensors on the bridge lit up, showing the vulnerable spot in the fleet's defenses. The moment of truth had arrived. "Noah, we're in position," Kira said. "Now or never." Noah worked quickly, his fingers flying over the console as he hacked into the enemy's systems. The hum of the ship's engines filled the silence as everyone held their breath, waiting. Kira's heart beat in her chest, faster and faster. She could almost hear the enemy commanders preparing their next move, unaware that the humans were about to strike. "Got it." Noah's voice rang out, filled with excitement. Their weapon systems are offline. We've got a clear shot. Fire, Kira commanded, her voice strong. A massive explosion erupted in the distance, lighting up the black void of space. The Aegis's cannons fired with deadly precision, striking the enemy flagship in its unprotected flank. The blast was powerful enough to send shockwaves through the fleet. The enemy ship faltered, its systems failing as the Aegis's shot tore through its defenses. For a moment, there was silence, and then the enemy commanders began shouting, their voices filled with panic. What is happening? Why are our systems failing? We've got them, Avery shouted, her voice triumphant. The flagship is going down. Kira allowed herself a brief moment of relief, but only a moment. The battle was far from over. The Aegis was still vulnerable, and the enemy wasn't finished yet. Captain, they're firing back. Noah yelled. Their remaining ships are targeting us. Brace for impact, Kira shouted, gripping the edge of her chair as the ship lurched under. Another barrage of enemy fire. The Aegis shook violently, and alarms blared once again. The ship's shields were nearly gone. They were running on empty. The enemy flagship, once proud and unstoppable, was now crippled. Its weapon systems failed, and its communications were cut off. But the rest of the enemy fleet, seeing their command ship in chaos, began to regroup, preparing to take on the humans with renewed fury. They were not going to give up so easily. We can't take much more of this, Avery shouted, her voice filled with panic. Their weapons are too strong. Kira knew it was time to make the hardest decision of her life. The Aegis couldn't keep this up much longer. If they didn't retreat now, they would be destroyed. But retreating would mean the end of humanity's last chance. She looked at her crew, each of them battered and weary, but determined. Prepare for an emergency jump, Kira said, her voice firm. We're not done yet. We'll fight another day. Noah worked quickly, tapping into the Aegis's backup systems, initiating the emergency warp drive. Engaging jump drive now, he said, his voice calm under pressure. With a sudden lurch, the Aegis was thrust into the warp, the familiar stars stretching and distorting as the ship disappeared from the battlefield. What do you think will happen next? Will the Aegis survive the enemy's retaliation? How will humanity fight back against this overwhelming power? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who loves epic space sci-fi adventures. We'll be back with the next part of this thrilling story soon. The Aegis lurched out of warp, the familiar hum of the engines grinding to a halt as the ship re-entered normal space. The tension in the bridge was palpable. Kira stood in front of the viewport, her eyes scanning the stars for any sign of the enemy fleet. They had made it, but barely. The Aegis was in no condition to engage in another battle. The ship was running on fumes, its weapons systems offline, and its engines barely functional. The crew was exhausted, their bodies and minds pushed to the brink. Captain, Noah's voice broke through the silence, his tone grave. We're in a remote sector, no sign of any enemy ships nearby. But we're not safe yet. Our power reserves are nearly depleted, and the damage we've sustained will take weeks to repair. We need to find a way to recover, and fast. Kira's mind raced as she considered their options. The battle had been a victory of sorts, but they hadn't won the war. The enemy was still out there, still hunting them. They couldn't afford to sit idle, to hope that they wouldn't be found. Humanity had already paid too high a price. We need to find a safe haven, Kira said, her voice calm despite the rising tension in her chest. We can't fight without power. Noah, find us a nearby station, anything that can help us. Regroup. Noah nodded and immediately began scanning the star charts, his fingers flying over the controls. Kira turned to her weapons officer, Avery. How's our combat readiness? Avery's eyes flickered to the monitors, her expression tense. We're down to minimal firepower. The secondary weapons are barely functioning. It would take us at least a week to get back to fighting shape, if we can even manage that. Kira nodded. It wasn't ideal, but it was the reality they were facing. They needed to recover. They needed to regroup. Do we have any medical supplies left? Barely enough for another day or two, Avery replied. We're going to need a resupply soon if we're going to stay functional. Then find us a station, Noah, Kira ordered. We need to patch up, restock, and strategize. We can't keep running forever. Noah's voice was tight with focus. I found something. There's a remote station in the outskirts of the system, a former military outpost. It's old, but it's still operational. We should be able to dock there and make repairs. Set course, Kira said, her tone resolute. Let's go. The Aegis moved slowly through the vast expanse of space, its damaged engines humming, with a barely perceptible noise. The stars outside the viewport seemed to stretch endlessly, and, for the first time in days, Kira allowed herself a moment of peace. The battle had taken its toll on the crew. They had fought with everything they had, and now they were exhausted, worn down by the constant pressure, the never-ending struggle to survive. Kira looked around the bridge at her crew, their faces drawn, their bodies tired. They were the last remnants of humanity's military might, and they had fought for their survival in a way no one had ever expected. They had held their ground, they had survived, but now they had to rebuild. They had to find a way to turn the tide. We'll make it, Kira whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. We have to. Noah's voice interrupted her thoughts. Captain, we've arrived at the station. Kira's eyes snapped to the screen, where the faint outline of the station came into view. It was small, its silhouette barely visible against the backdrop of the stars. The station was old, its hull scarred by time and neglect, but it was still functional. The lights flickered in the station's control room, signaling that someone was there, waiting for them. Prepare to dock, Kira ordered, straightening in her chair. Let's hope they're willing to help. U.S. As the Aegis drifted toward the station, Kira's mind wandered back to the enemy fleet. They had escaped for now, but they couldn't keep running. The enemy would eventually track them down, and when that happened, they had to be ready. They needed to rebuild their strength, and they needed to do it fast. The battle they had just fought was only a small part of the war. The enemy was vast, and they wouldn't stop until humanity was crushed. Kira couldn't let that happen. The docking bay doors opened with a soft hiss as the Aegis settled into place. Kira stood, her boots clicking softly on the metal floor as she walked toward the airlock. The crew followed her, their expressions grim. The station was quiet, eerily so. It was a far cry from the bustling military outposts they had once known. The air was stale, and the station's corridors seemed dark and empty, as though it had been abandoned for years. They moved through the narrow hallways, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The station had once been a hub of activity, but now it felt like a forgotten relic, a place left behind by time and war. It was hard to believe that anyone still lived here. Kira's thoughts were interrupted when a voice broke the silence. You've come for help, haven't you? Kira turned to see a figure standing in the doorway. A man, tall and weathered, his face marked by the passage of time and hardship. His uniform was old, faded, but still bearing the insignia of the military. Kira stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. Are you in charge here? She asked, her voice steady but firm. The man nodded. I'm the last one left. We've been maintaining the station, keeping it functional, but it's not much. If you're looking for supplies or repairs, we might be able to help. Kira hesitated for a moment, weighing her options. They needed the help, but she didn't trust this place, didn't trust the man standing in front of her. But right now, they had no choice. They had to make do with whatever they could get. We need everything, Kira said. Food, medical supplies, and most importantly, we need repairs. Our ship is barely holding together. Can you help us? The man looked her over, his eyes filled with a mix of caution and curiosity. I can help with repairs, but it's going to take time. We have limited resources, and I can't guarantee that you'll find much here in terms of supplies. But if you want to stay, you can, for a while. Kira nodded. We don't need to stay long, just long enough to get back on our feet. Over the next few days, the crew of the Aegis worked tirelessly to repair the ship, using the limited resources available on the station. Kira's thoughts were never far from the enemy fleet. They had bought themselves some time, but time was a luxury they didn't have. The enemy would come looking for them, and when they did, they needed to be ready. Captain, Noah said one evening, his voice filled with unease. I've been tracking the enemy's movements. They're still active, still searching for us. They haven't given up. Kira sighed, rubbing her temples. The pressure was mounting. We can't run forever, Noah. We need to figure out a way to fight back, to make them think twice before they come after us. Again, Noah nodded, his eyes focused on the screen in front of him. I've been working on that. If we can repair the ship fully and get the systems back online, we can strike back. We may not be able to win, but we can make them regret underestimating us. Kira met his gaze, her jaw set. We need to do more than just strike back. We need to show them we're not finished. We need to take the fight to them, hit them where it hurts. As the repairs on the Aegis continued, Kira's mind was focused on one thing: how to turn the tide of this war. She couldn't afford to sit back and wait for the enemy to find them. Humanity had been knocked down, but they were not out. She would fight, and she would make sure the enemy knew that. The station had provided them with a brief respite, but Kira knew it wouldn't last. The crew was ready. They were more than ready. They had fought for their survival, and they would fight again. They just needed the right moment. What do you think will happen next? Will Kira and her crew be able to get the Aegis back in fighting shape in time? How will they plan their next move against the enemy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who loves epic sci-fi adventures. The fight is far from over, and we'll keep bringing you more stories just like this one. The crew worked tirelessly on the Aegis for days, and despite the exhaustion weighing down on them, there was a sense of purpose in the air. The station's facilities were crude, but they had everything they needed to keep the Aegis alive, at least for now. Kira stood in front of the viewport once more, staring into the vast, empty expanse of space. It was hard to believe that, just days ago, they had been locked in a brutal battle for their survival, but that battle was far from over. The Aegis was almost repaired, but there was still so much to do. The ship's engines were powered down, and the backup systems were the only things keeping them alive. The crew was tired, worn out from the constant strain, but they had survived, and now they needed to turn that survival into something more. How are the repairs going? Kira asked, her voice calm, though she could feel the weight of the decision that lay ahead pressing down on her. Noah looked up from his console, his face weary but focused. The ship's almost ready. The hull's been patched up, and we're restoring power to the primary systems. The engines will be up and running in a few hours, but we'll need to perform some more in-depth repairs to make the Aegis combat ready again. It'll take a few days. Kira nodded, her mind already racing through the possibilities. They couldn't wait. The enemy was still out there, and they couldn't afford to waste any more time. She needed to make a decision. The crew had done all they could to stay hidden, to repair the ship and stay off the radar, but that wouldn't be enough. The Aegis couldn't run forever, and the longer they waited, the more vulnerable they became. We'll need to take the fight to them, Kira muttered, more to herself than anyone else. We can't afford to be reactive anymore. We need to show them that we're not just a target to be picked off. Avery looked up from her station, catching Kira's gaze. Captain, are you sure? We're still vulnerable. If we go out there, we're going to be sitting ducks. We need more time to repair the ship. Kira met her eyes, her expression unwavering. We don't have time. The enemy is already regrouping. They'll be back before we're ready. We need to hit them now, while they're still reeling from our last attack. Noah turned back to his console, his face drawn with tension. We've still got the element of surprise on our side, he said, his fingers flying over the controls. If we're careful, we might be able to strike at their command fleet. We can cripple their ability to launch another attack. Kira's gaze flickered to the star charts on the screen, her mind calculating. They needed to hit fast and hard. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about taking the initiative, making the enemy realize that humanity was not to be underestimated. She clenched her fists at her sides. This was the moment. If they didn't act now, they would be sitting ducks. Prepare for a strike, Kira said, her voice firm and resolute. We're going after their command fleet. We'll disable their central operations, force them to regroup. It's our only chance. Avery's face was a mask of determination. We'll do what we can, Captain, but this is going to be risky. We don't have a choice, Kira replied. I'm counting on you, Avery. This is it. Noah nodded, his fingers still flying over the console as he worked to adjust the Aegis's systems. We'll need to break through their outer defenses first. It's going to be a tough fight, but we've got the firepower to do it. If we can get close enough, we'll be able to disable their command ship before they can react. Kira watched as Noah worked, his focus unbroken. He was good to good, but even he couldn't work miracles. The Aegis was still a shadow of its former self, and the enemy would know that. They would be on high alert, but that didn't matter. If humanity was to survive, they needed to act, and they needed to act now. The Aegis surged forward, the ship creaking as the engines powered up. The station was now far behind them, a distant memory of what they had left behind. The crew was tense, each of them ready for the battle that lay ahead. There was no turning back now. The enemy fleet, though damaged, was still formidable. The Aegis was running on limited resources, and every move they made had to count. They couldn't afford a single mistake. "Captain," Avery said, her voice calm despite the nerves she could feel in her stomach. "We're approaching their fleet. Our scans show a weak spot in their formation. It's our only chance to break through." Kira stood by the viewport, her eyes narrowing as she studied the enemy ships. They were bigger, more powerful, and their numbers were overwhelming. But the Aegis had speed and agility to things the enemy lacked. And if Kira had anything to say about it, speed and agility would be their greatest weapons. "Noah, give me everything we've got," Kira commanded, her voice hard. "Let's hit them before they realize what's happening." Noah's fingers flew over the console as he adjusted the ship's systems. "I've optimized the weapons, Captain. We've got a clear shot at their command ship's vulnerable spots. It'll be a quick strike, but we've got to time it perfectly." "Understood," Kira said, her voice steady as the tension in the bridge reached its peak. "Everyone, brace for impact. This is it." The Aegis shot forward, dodging incoming fire as the crew worked in unison. Kira's pulse quickened as they approached the enemy's command ship. The enemy fleet was distracted, unaware of the Aegis's movement. The moment was critical. Kira felt the weight of the situation bearing down on her. If they missed this chance, there would be no second shot. "We're in range," Avery said, her voice tight. "Targeting systems locked. Ready to fire on your command." "Fire," Kira ordered, her voice a cold, cutting command. The Aegis fired with precision, the energy blast hitting the enemy flagship squarely in the weak spot Noah had identified. The ship shuddered as the blast hit, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The enemy fleet reacted too late, their shields flickering as their flagship began to implode under the force of the strike. "We've got them," Avery said, a hint of triumph in her voice. "The command ship is down." But Kira knew better than to get comfortable. The enemy would regroup. They would retaliate. The Aegis couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long. "Noah, get us out of here now," Kira shouted. Noah didn't hesitate, his hands moving swiftly over the controls as the Aegis shot away from the enemy fleet, using the chaos they had created to slip into the blind spot once more. The ship groaned under the strain, the systems barely holding together, but they had done it. They had struck a blow, and they had done it while the enemy was unprepared. The crew stood in silence as the Aegis sped away, their eyes fixed on the stars outside. The battle was far from over, but Kira allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. They had made it, for now. "Captain," Noah said, breaking the silence. "We've lost contact with the enemy fleet. They're in disarray, but we won't have long before they regroup." "We need to keep moving," Kira replied. "Head for the outer rim. We need to regroup and figure out our next move." As the Aegis drifted into the depths of space, Kira felt the weight of the decisions she had made. Humanity had survived, but the road ahead would not be easy. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over, and as long as the enemy was out there, they would keep fighting. "What's the next step?" Avery asked, her voice uncertain. Kira turned to her crew, her face a mask of resolve. "We keep going. We survive. And we show the galaxy that humanity is not to be trifled with. We're just getting started." "What will happen next? Will Kira and her crew be able to regroup and prepare for the next phase of the battle? How will they continue to fight back against the overwhelming force of the enemy fleet? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who loves epic space stories. Keep watching for more updates on this thrilling adventure. The hum of the Aegis was all that could be heard in the quiet bridge as Kira sat, staring at the navigation screen. The ship's hull was still battered from the last skirmish, and every creak of the structure reminded her how close they'd come to losing everything. The crew, though, remained focused. Despite the physical and emotional exhaustion, they had managed to deliver a blow to the enemy that they hadn't expected. Kira knew that if they survived this war, it would be because of the crew's determination, ingenuity, and the sheer will to continue pushing forward, no matter what. "Captain," Avery's voice broke through her thoughts. "We're approaching the edge of the system. No signs of the enemy fleet yet." Kira nodded, her mind racing. They'd made it for now, but the enemy would be hunting them. That was a certainty. The Aegis had successfully disabled their command ship, but they had yet to deal with the remaining force. Time was not on their side. "Keep moving," Kira ordered, her voice steady. "We can't stop here. We need to get to the outer rim, get as far away as we can." "We're almost there," Noah responded, his hands still flying over his console as he monitored the systems. "But Captain, we need to address our power situation." we're running on minimal reserves. We need to find a place to recharge, or we won't make it much further. Understood, Kira said, her eyes scanning the distant stars outside the viewport. Noah, keep searching for stations, anything we can use. We don't have the luxury of running on empty. Noah didn't need to be told twice. He immediately dove into the star charts, calculating their best options. Kira, meanwhile, thought back on the decision they had made, the decision to strike at the heart of the enemy fleet, despite their own vulnerabilities. The gamble had paid off, but it had also cost them precious resources. Their time was running out. Captain, there's a station on the outskirts of the system. Noah's voice broke her concentration. It's an old refueling station, abandoned, but it might still have the power we need. Kira didn't hesitate. Set course. Let's hope they have what we need. As the Aegis slowly approached the refueling station, Kira could feel the weight of the journey pressing down on her. She knew the crew was just as weary as she was. The mental toll of the constant fight, the uncertainty, the fear, it was all wearing on them. And the worst part was, they had no idea how long they would have to keep running. The enemy could show up at any moment, and when they did, the Aegis had to be ready. Docking procedures initiated, Avery reported, her hands moving efficiently across her console. We should be able to refuel in under an hour. Kira nodded. Good. I want everyone back on board and ready for anything. We don't know what kind of security measures are in place at that station. The Aegis slowly came into contact with the station's docking bay, the familiar hissing sound of the airlock sealing into place. Kira stood, moving towards the exit of the bridge. As she left, she glanced back at Noah, Avery, and the rest of the crew. They were all there, waiting for her command, but she knew that no matter how hard they worked, no matter how much they sacrificed, there would always be something more to do. The station's interior was cold and dark, but it still looked functional. There were signs of decay, here and there, dust covering abandoned consoles, and old machines left in disrepair, but there was a faint hum of power still running through the place. Kira was cautiously optimistic. Stay alert, she ordered, as they made their way down the narrow corridors. The place felt deserted, but that didn't mean it was safe. It only took one unexpected attack for everything to go wrong. No signs of life, Avery said, scanning the area with a wary eye. Looks like the place is completely abandoned. We should be fine. Kira wasn't so sure. Don't let your guard down. We don't know who or what was here before us. They found their way to the main control room, and Kira immediately went to the central console. Let's see what we're working with. The console flickered to life at her touch, revealing a series of old system readings. It wasn't the most advanced technology, but it was enough to get the job done. Kira ran a quick diagnostic on the station's power reserves. They had enough fuel to top off the Aegis, but the repairs needed on the ship were far more complex than just a simple refuel. Still, every drop of power they could get was precious. Needed on the ship were far more complex than just a simple refuel. Still, every drop of power they could get was precious. This should hold us for a while, Noah said, his voice full of relief as he checked the fuel reserves. We'll be able to make it to the next station, maybe even launch a small attack if we need to. Kira nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. We need to get the engines back online, she said, her voice thoughtful. The longer we wait, the more vulnerable we become. They worked through the night, repairing the Aegis as best they could, making use of whatever tools and resources they could find on the station. Kira didn't sleep. There wasn't time for that. The enemy fleet wasn't far behind, and she couldn't afford to be caught off guard again. Captain, Noah's voice interrupted her thoughts. I found something. The station's comms are still active. I'm receiving a transmission encrypted, but it's definitely coming from the enemy. Kira's eyes narrowed. What's it saying? Noah's fingers moved rapidly across the console as he decrypted the message. It's a warning and order for all enemy ships to be on high alert. They've realized we're still alive. They're actively searching for us. Kira's heart sank. How long before they find us? Noah shook his head. It could be hours. It could be days. But we're not going to sit here and wait for them to show up. The Aegis was fueled up and ready to go, but Kira's mind was still racing. The enemy fleet would be here soon, and they needed to make their move. The crew gathered on the bridge, their faces grim as they prepared for whatever came next. Kira looked at each of them, the weight of the responsibility settling on her shoulders. They had fought for their survival, but now they were fighting for something greater, a future. They couldn't keep running forever. The enemy would find them eventually. The question was, when? We leave in 10 minutes, Kira said, her voice steady. We can't afford to wait here any longer. We're going to find their fleet and strike first. We hit them before they can get to us. Avery and Noah exchanged glances, but both nodded. Understood, Captain. The Aegis slowly powered up, the engines humming to life once again. Kira watched the station fade into the distance as they navigated back into space. There would be no more hiding. There would be no more running. The time had come to fight. Let's finish this, Kira said quietly to herself, her voice filled with determination. As the Aegis sped towards the enemy fleet's last known location, the bridge fell silent. Kira could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the mission on her crew's shoulders. They were ready for whatever came next. This wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. It was a battle to reclaim their place in the galaxy. They would show the enemy that humanity was not to be underestimated, not to be ignored. And if the enemy didn't understand that yet, well, they would soon enough. What will happen next? Will Kira and her crew finally face off against the enemy fleet? How will they fare in this next stage of the battle? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who loves epic space adventures. The journey is just beginning, and we'll keep bringing you more stories like this one. The engines of the Aegis hummed steadily as the ship sped through the emptiness of space. Kira stood on the bridge, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair, her gaze locked on the view screen. Ahead of them lay the remnants of the enemy fleet, scattered and disorganized, but still a formidable threat. She had known they wouldn't be able to avoid a direct confrontation forever, but even now, as the enemy fleet loomed larger, she wasn't afraid. They had made it this far by sticking together, by working as a team, and now they were going to do the same. Captain, we're approaching the enemy fleet's location. Noah's voice cut through the silence of the bridge. Their ships are spread out, but they're still heavily armed. They'll regroup soon, but we've got a small window of opportunity. Kira took a deep breath, her mind racing as she analyzed their options. They didn't have the luxury of time. The Aegis was still running on minimal power, and they couldn't afford to engage in a prolonged fight. Their best chance was to strike fast, hit them hard, and get out before the enemy had time to react. Set a course for their command ship, Kira ordered, her voice calm but full of authority. We need to take out their central operations. If we can disrupt their command, the rest of their fleet will fall apart. Noah didn't hesitate. Aye, Captain. Setting course for their command ship. We'll be in range in 5 minutes. The crew worked in unison, each of them fully aware of what was at stake. Avery, the weapons officer, was already preparing the targeting systems. She had grown more focused and determined with every battle, and today was no different. Kira glanced at her briefly before turning back to the view screen. The enemy fleet was vast, but it wasn't invincible. They had taken a huge risk by attacking their command ship earlier, and it had paid off. Now, they had to capitalize on that advantage. Captain, Avery spoke up, her voice tight with concentration. I've identified their flagship. It's heavily shielded, but we can get through it. The question is, how long will we have once we engage? Kira's eyes narrowed. She knew the enemy wouldn't make it easy, but this was their best shot. We strike fast, hit them with everything we've got and then retreat. We don't stay in the fight longer than we need to. Understood, Avery said, her voice firm. I'm ready when you are. Kira stood up, her mind focused, her body tense. Noah, are we ready? Noah nodded, his eyes fixed on the screens. We're as ready as we can be. Engines are at full power, and the weapons systems are primed. We're good to go. Kira took a deep breath. This was it. They couldn't afford to miss this opportunity. The Aegis surged forward, cutting through space with speed and precision. The enemy flagship loomed ahead, its dark silhouette contrasting against the backdrop of stars. The tension in the air was thick, and every second felt like an eternity. The crew was ready, but Kira knew that no matter how prepared they were, there would always be unknowns in battle. Fire, Kira commanded, her voice low but filled with resolve. The Aegis's weapon systems came to life, firing a volley of energy blasts at the flagship. The shots hit their mark, causing the enemy ship to shudder under the impact. For a moment, there was silence, and then the enemy fleet reacted. It was Chaos ships firing back, shields flaring, as they tried to regroup. But the Aegis had already made its move. They had struck first, and now they had to make their escape. We've breached their shields, Avery shouted, her voice rising with excitement. Direct hit to the flagship's core. Kira's heart pounded in her chest. The plan was working, but they had to keep moving. Noah, get us out of here, Kira ordered, her voice urgent. Noah didn't need to be told twice. He immediately punched in the coordinates for a nearby asteroid field. The Aegis veered sharply, the ship's engines roaring as it cut through space, weaving through debris and asteroids to cover their retreat. The enemy ships fired back, but they were slow to react. The Aegis was faster, more agile, and it used the field to their advantage. They're pursuing, Avery said, her voice tense, but they're not as quick as we are. We're outpacing them. Kira nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen. The battle wasn't over, but they had gained a crucial advantage. They had struck at the heart of the enemy fleet, and now they had to use the asteroid field to put distance between themselves and their pursuers. Stay sharp, Kira warned. They'll try to get around the field and cut us off. Keep them on the defensive. Noah's fingers flew over the controls as he steered the Aegis through the debris. They're not getting close. We've got a few minutes before they regroup, but I wouldn't wait around to find out what they'll do next. Kira glanced at her crew. They were all on edge, but they were holding it together. They had survived so much already. This was just another obstacle they would overcome. Keep it steady, Noah. We need to make sure they don't have a chance to catch up. The Aegis continued its evasive maneuvers, but the enemy was relentless. Their ships were slower, but they had more firepower. As Kira looked at the screen, she knew they had only one chance left to escape without losing everything. They had to make it count. Captain, Noah said, his voice filled with urgency. I'm detecting another enemy fleet on the other side of the field. They're closing in on us fast. We don't have enough time to outrun them. Kira cursed under her breath. Can we get through the field before they catch us? Noah didn't answer right away. His hands moved quickly over the controls, calculating their options. Finally, he looked up. We can try, but it's going to be risky. The asteroid field's density is too high for us to make a clean escape. We'll have to cut through it at full speed and hope we don't hit anything. Kira's mind raced. They couldn't afford to waste time. Do it, she said, her voice sharp. We don't have any other options. We go now. The Aegis rocketed forward, its engines roaring as it shot through the asteroid field at breakneck speed. Kira's grip tightened on the armrests as the ship swerved and dipped, narrowly avoiding chunks of rock and debris that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The crew held on, their bodies pressed into their seats as the ship twisted and turned, barely staying ahead of the oncoming enemy. We're almost there, Avery shouted, her voice full of excitement. We're through the worst of it. But even as she spoke, the enemy fleet was closing in. The ships were too close now. Kira's heart raced as she watched their weapons charge, preparing to fire. This was it. They had to make one last move, or they would be caught. Evasive maneuvers, Kira commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Noah expertly piloted the ship, weaving through the asteroids as the enemy ships fired at them. A blast grazed the Aegis's hull, sending a shockwave through the ship. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered. Kira's mind focused, blocking out the chaos as she watched the enemy fleet ahead. We can make it, Kira whispered to herself. We have to make it. The Aegis broke free from the asteroid field, its engine screaming in overdrive as it sped toward open space. The enemy fleet was still pursuing, but they had gained precious moments. Kira watched the stars outside the viewport as the Aegis raced toward safety. The ship was damaged. The crew was exhausted, but they had survived. For now. Captain, Noah said, his voice filled with relief. We've lost them. They won't be able to follow us now. We're clear. Kira leaned back in her chair, her body drained. They had made it. They had taken the fight to the enemy, and they had survived. But this wasn't over, not by a long shot. We've bought ourselves some time, Kira said, her voice low but firm. But we can't rest yet. We need to keep moving. We need to stay ahead of them. She looked at her crew, their faces tired but resolute. They had fought together, and they had won. But the war was far from over, and as long as they had breath in their bodies, they would keep fighting. This isn't the end, Kira said, her voice steady with determination. It's just the beginning. What will happen next? Will Kira and her crew be able to regroup and prepare for the final showdown? How will they continue to fight back against the overwhelming enemy force? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who loves intense space adventures. The fight isn't over, and we'll keep bringing you more epic stories just like this one. The Aegis drifted through space, its engines now running at optimal levels after the grueling battle with the enemy fleet. Despite the ship's temporary victory, the crew was on edge. The ship had taken more damage than Kira had anticipated, but at least they were alive, and that was something. The small respite they had earned by escaping. The enemy had only given them a fleeting moment of peace. Kira stood in front of the viewport, staring at the darkness of space. She had always loved the view, the endless expanse that stretched out before them. But tonight, there was no peace in the stars. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the battle, to the risk they had taken, and to the enemy fleet that had been left behind but not defeated. They would regroup. They would come for them again. Kira knew that much, and when they did, they had to be ready. Captain, Avery's voice broke into her thoughts. We've got a problem. Kira turned sharply, her eyes narrowing, as she looked at the weapons officer. What's wrong? We've been getting some unusual readings, Avery said, tapping a few buttons on her console. It's faint, but it looks like there's another enemy fleet ahead. Not one of their main forces, but it's large enough to be concerning. They've somehow tracked us down. Kira's jaw clenched. How long do we have? They're still a few hours out, Avery replied. We can't outrun them with our current speed, but we've got some time to prepare. Kira felt the familiar weight of command settle on her shoulders. They had to act fast, but they also couldn't risk doing anything too reckless. They'd been in close quarters with the enemy before, and it had cost them. She couldn't let that happen again. Noah, she called, turning to the ship's engineer. What's our current power reserve? Can we get any more speed out of this ship? Noah glanced at his screens, his brow furrowing in concentration. We're running at about 60% capacity, Captain, he said after a moment. I can push the engines harder, but it'll risk damaging the hull further. It'll also drain the power reserves faster than we can recharge. It's a gamble, and I don't like it. Kira considered his words carefully. They couldn't afford to let the enemy catch up to them, but they couldn't afford to sacrifice their ship either. What's our best option? Noah took a deep breath. We can push the engines for a few more hours, but after that, we'll have to either stop and recharge or risk going into the next engagement with the crippled ship. My suggestion, we stay the course and prepare for a fight. We can't keep running forever. Kira turned her eyes back to the vast emptiness outside. She'd always known the stakes would be high, but this was beginning to feel like a war they couldn't win. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and every battle they fought drained them more. The Aegis was strong, but it wasn't invincible. All right, Kira said, her voice firm. We'll make the most of what we've got. Set course for their fleet, but keep us moving at full speed for as long as we can. I'll need everyone ready. Prepare for another battle. We won't back down. As the Aegis accelerated toward the incoming fleet, the crew worked in a tense silence. Kira could feel the weight of her decisions pressing down on her, each one a gamble. They were fighting for their survival, but they couldn't keep running forever. The moment had come to make their stand. The ship shook as the engines roared with effort, the familiar hum of the Aegis's systems, making way for a harsher, more desperate sound. Kira stood, her eyes fixed on the screens as the enemy fleet grew larger. Her hands clenched into fists, and her mind raced. She couldn't afford to fail. The crew had been through so much already, and this time, they couldn't count on just escaping. The fight ahead would be their toughest yet. Captain, Avery spoke up again. We're getting their comms loud and clear. They're preparing for battle. Looks like they've regrouped faster than we anticipated. Kira's mind immediately ran through their options. The Aegis was already at full speed, and there wasn't much time to come up with a new plan. She needed to act fast, focus on their outer ships. We need to break their formation, weaken their defenses before we engage their main fleet. Noah adjusted the power flow, increasing the energy output to the weapons systems. I'm doing everything I can to get more power, Captain. We'll be ready, but the ship's integrity is still a concern. We can't keep pushing it forever. Understood, Kira replied. Do what you can. We're not running from this one. We fight until we're out of options. As the enemy fleet grew closer, Kira's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for. She had no illusions about the outcome. This battle wouldn't be like the last. They wouldn't just strike and run. This time, they would fight to win. The Aegis came into range first, its weapons firing rapidly. The enemy ships responded, launching their own volleys in retaliation. The air was thick with the sound of energy blasts and the ship rocked under the impact. Kira gripped the armrests of her chair, her focus unwavering, as the Aegis weaved through the incoming fire. They've got heavy shields, Captain, Avery reported, her voice strained. We'll need to break through them before we can target their weapons. Kira's mind worked quickly. The Aegis was fast, but it was also heavily armed. They couldn't afford to waste time. They had to focus on one ship at a time, break through the outer defenses, and then deal with the rest. Target the right flank, Kira ordered. Let's focus on their weakest point. We'll carve our way through. The Aegis fired a precise shot, hitting the enemy ship's shields dead on. The blast created a rippling shockwave, and for a moment, the enemy ship seemed to stagger. Kira's heart skipped a beat. This could work. If they could break the enemy's formation, they could disrupt their entire fleet. Nice shot, Avery, Kira said, her voice filled with admiration. Keep it up. Avery's face remained calm, her hands moving quickly as she recalibrated the targeting systems. Firing again, she said, her voice steady. The Aegis fired once more, the energy blast hitting the enemy ship's weak spot. The shields flickered and failed, and the ship began to break apart under the strain. The crew watched in silent awe as the enemy vessel exploded in a shower of sparks and debris. One down, Avery said, her eyes fixed on the screens. Let's keep it going. But Kira knew this was just the beginning. The enemy fleet would regroup quickly, and the Aegis couldn't keep up this pace for long. They had to keep pushing, but they had to be smart about it. Focus on their command ship next, Kira ordered. We take out their leader, and the rest of the fleet will fall apart. The Aegis surged forward, cutting through the space between them and the enemy flagship. The larger ships in the fleet moved to intercept them, but Kira was ready. This time, there would be no hesitation. They had the upper hand, and she wasn't going to waste it. Noah, take us in close. We're going to hit them with everything we've got. Aye, Captain, Noah replied, his fingers flying over the controls. The ship groaned as it adjusted, its trajectory sliding into position for the final strike. The Aegis surged toward the command ship with deadly precision. The crew was fully engaged. Now, every system on the ship working in perfect harmony as they approached their target. The enemy fleet moved to intercept them, but Kira knew they had a limited window. They couldn't waste time. Brace for impact, Kira said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. This is it. The Aegis fired, its energy blast slamming into the command ship's outer defenses. The enemy flagship's shields cracked under the pressure, and for a moment, Kira thought they might have done it, but then the flagship retaliated, launching a volley of its own weapons in retaliation. The Aegis shook violently as the blast struck their hull, alarms blaring as the ship's systems strained. We've lost power to the forward shields, Avery shouted, her hands working quickly to stabilize the weapon systems. We need to pull back. Kira's eyes were fixed on the view screen. The enemy flagship was close now to close, but they couldn't pull back. Not yet. No, Kira said firmly. We finish this, now. The Aegis pushed forward, its remaining power pushing it to the limit. Kira's mind was focused, her heart pounding as they closed in on the enemy flagship. This was the moment. They had to take it. Fire everything, Kira shouted, her voice sharp and commanding. The Aegis fired its final barrage, and the enemy flagship erupted in a burst of light. The shockwave from the explosion rocked the ship, but the crew held on. The Aegis was still alive. They had won. For now. We did it, Avery said, her voice filled with disbelief. The flagship's down. Kira let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. They had done it. They had taken down the heart of the enemy fleet. But the war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. We've won this battle, Kira said, her voice steady as she surveyed the wreckage outside. But this is just the beginning. We keep fighting until this is over. What happens next? Will Kira and her crew survive the aftermath of the battle? Can they continue to fight and push the enemy back? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who loves intense space adventures. The journey continues. The silence that followed the destruction of the enemy flagship was deafening. The crew of the Aegis stood in stunned relief, their breath shallow, their eyes glued to the view screen as they watched the remnants of the enemy ship disintegrate into space. The mission was a success, but it wasn't without a cost. They had lost valuable time, resources, and part of their hull in the intense battle, and the crew was exhausted. Still, they had struck a blow to the enemy, and for now, that had to be enough. Kira, standing at the helm, felt the weight of the moment settle over her. They had done what many would have thought impossible. They had defeated a powerful enemy fleet and taken down the heart of their operation. But the war wasn't over, not by a long shot. As much as she wanted to savor the victory, She knew that the enemy would be regrouping, preparing for another wave of attacks. The Aegis had to stay ahead of them. Captain, Noah's voice broke through the silence, pulling her from her thoughts. We've got a problem. Kira turned, narrowing her eyes at him. What's going on? We've got significant hull damage, Noah said, his voice steady but laced with concern. We can't push the engines much further. The ship's power systems are stretched thin, and if we try to accelerate too much, we could lose even more critical systems. Kira's jaw tightened. They had pushed the Aegis hard, and it had held up, but it was starting to show signs of wear. She couldn't afford to be caught in a vulnerable state again, not with the enemy still out there. How much time do we have? Kira asked, her voice low. Noah didn't hesitate. We've got maybe 2 hours before we start losing full control of some of the systems. After that, it'll be a gamble. We need to find a place to repair or we'll be dead in the water. Kira glanced around the bridge. The crew was on edge, exhausted, but focused. They were all aware of the ticking clock. The battle had been brutal, but there wasn't time to rest, not now. We need to find a safe zone, Kira said, her voice cutting through the tension. Noah, any nearby systems that we can use for repairs? There's a mining station about 10 hours away, Noah said, bringing up the coordinates on his console. It's uninhabited, but it has the resources we need. It's a bit of a detour, but it's the closest place I can find. Kira looked at the screen, weighing their options. Set course for the mining station. We don't have time to waste. Keep the engines at minimal power. I don't want to risk overheating anything. Noah nodded and began inputting the coordinates. The Aegis shifted into motion, its engines humming quietly as it set off toward the mining station. Kira stood for a moment, watching the stars drift by, before sitting back in her chair. The mission wasn't over. There was always something more to be done. She knew she couldn't let her guard down. Not yet. The journey to the mining station was uneventful, but every second of it felt like a lifetime. The crew moved methodically through the ship, preparing for the repairs they would need to make once they reached their destination. But even as the Aegis cruised through the emptiness of space, Kira couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The enemy was still out there. They were regrouping, and they would be back. Captain, Avery's voice broke into her thoughts. I've been going through the data we've gathered from the battle. There's something odd about their fleet. I've been analyzing their movements, and it doesn't add up. Kira turned to face Avery, raising an eyebrow. What do you mean? The enemy fleet, the one we just defeated, wasn't acting like a standard military force, Avery said, tapping her console to bring up the data. Their tactics were erratic. They were reacting to us, not anticipating our moves like they should have. It's almost like they were waiting for something. Kira frowned, her mind racing. Waiting for what? I don't know, Avery said, shaking her head. But there's more. Their communications were encrypted, but they were broadcasting signals while we attacked. I think they were sending out a distress signal. They were calling for reinforcements. Kira felt a cold chill run down her spine. Reinforcements. They weren't just dealing with the ships they'd already faced. There was more coming, much more. How soon before reinforcements arrive? Kira asked, her voice low. Avery hesitated before answering. At least another few hours. We've still got some time before they reach us, but the clock is ticking. We need to be ready, Kira said, her voice resolute. Get the crew prepared for another fight. Once we reach the mining station, we'll have to move quickly. We can't afford to stay in one place for long. Avery nodded, already moving to inform the rest of the crew. Kira stood for a moment, staring at the screen. The Aegis had been through so much already, and yet, the enemies' reinforcements were coming, faster than they could anticipate. There was no time to relax, no time to regroup. They had to keep moving forward. The mining station came into view several hours later, its massive asteroid base floating silently in the void. It was an old facility, a relic of a bygone era, but it was equipped with the necessary tools for repairs. Kira took a deep breath as the Aegis slowly approached, its sensors scanning for any signs of movement. They were alone, for now. Prepare to dock, Kira ordered, her voice steady. We've got one shot at this. Make it count. The Aegis docked with the station, and the crew quickly moved into action. The repairs had to be done quickly. There was no time to waste. Kira walked down the hallways, her mind racing, as she thought through their next moves. They couldn't stay on the station too long, but they needed the repairs. The Aegis couldn't survive another engagement like the one they had just faced. Noah was already in the engine room, working on the systems. We're going to need a few hours, Captain, he said when she arrived. The damage is more extensive than I thought. It's going to take longer to get everything back online. Kira cursed under her breath. They didn't have hours. They had minutes, if they were lucky. Do what you can, she said, her voice tight. I'll make sure the crew is ready for what comes next. Noah didn't respond, but his fingers flew across the consoles as he worked to make the necessary repairs. Kira walked down the hallway, stopping in front of the crew's quarters. The crew was exhausted, and they needed rest, but there wasn't time for that. They had to be ready. Captain, Avery approached her. I've got some good news and some bad news. Kira raised an eyebrow. Let's have it. The good news is, we've got a full load of resources from the station, Avery said. We've got enough to repair most of the damage, and we've got extra supplies. We're good to go for the next stretch. Kira nodded, relieved. What's the bad news? The enemy fleet is closer than we thought, Avery said, her eyes narrowing. They're still a few hours away, but we can't afford to wait any longer. We've repaired what we can, but we're still vulnerable. The best we can do is make sure we're ready to leave the moment Noah finishes the repairs. Kira nodded again. The enemy wasn't far behind, and the last thing they needed was to be caught off guard. Get everyone ready, she said. We leave as soon as we're good to go. Make sure everyone knows what's coming. The crew worked quickly, preparing for the worst. They didn't know exactly what was coming, but they knew it wouldn't be easy. Kira watched them work, her heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. They had already been through so much, but this next fight would be their greatest test yet. Hours passed, and as Noah completed the final repairs, the Aegis was ready to go. The ship had been patched up, but it wasn't perfect. There were still vulnerabilities, and Kira knew that. The next battle could be their last. She stood on the bridge, her crew in position, ready for whatever came next. Captain, Noah said, his voice tense. We've got a problem. The enemy's reinforcements are here. Kira's heart sank. The battle was far from over, but they weren't backing down now. All hands, prepare for battle. This is it. What happens next? Will Kira and her crew survive the next wave of the enemy fleet? How will they continue to fight back against the overwhelming force? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who loves epic space adventures. The fight continues. The Aegis lurched forward as it powered up for the final confrontation. Kira stood at the helm, her mind laser-focused on the task ahead. The crew had fought through hell to get here, but the fight wasn't over. This was their last chance to win, and failure wasn't an option. Not now. Not after everything they had sacrificed. As they approached the flagship, Kira's breath caught. The enemy fleet had been scattered, but the flagship remained. It loomed large in front of them, its sleek, deadly form bristling with weapons that could obliterate them with a single strike. But Kira didn't hesitate. She had spent too much time preparing, too much effort going into this moment. The Aegis had been through enough. It was time for the final stand. All systems are online. Avery's voice broke through the tension, calm but filled with urgency. We're in range of the flagship. Locking on target. Kira's hands gripped the controls tightly, her mind racing as she went over the plan one last time. Noah, give us more power. We need everything we've got. I'm pushing it to the limit, Captain, Noah replied. But after this, we're on our last leg. You've got what you need to make this count. Kira nodded. Avery, focus all fire on their weapon systems. We need to disable their ability to strike back. Avery's fingers flew across the console, and the Aegis's weapon systems hummed to life. Energy beams erupted from the ship, striking the flagship's outer shields. For a moment, nothing happened. The shields held strong, shimmering against the incoming fire. But Kira didn't flinch. The first volley was a test, a way to gauge their defenses. Shields are holding, Avery reported. We'll need to land more hits to break through. Kira's eyes narrowed as she scanned the enemy ship. The flagship's shields were formidable, but they weren't invincible. The Aegis had to push through. There was no other way. Keep up the fire, Avery. We'll breach them. Stay focused, Kira commanded, her voice unyielding. The next series of blasts hit their mark. The enemy flagship's shields flickered, giving way under the force of the Aegis's relentless assault. Kira felt a surge of hope, just a little more, and they could break through. But as the flagship's shields finally cracked, the real fight began. The enemy retaliated with a barrage of its own. The Aegis shuddered violently as explosions rocked the hull, sending tremors through the ship. Alarms blared across the bridge, and the lights flickered as the system strained to keep up. "We've lost primary power to the starboard side," Noah reported. "We're taking heavy damage. I'm doing what I can, but I can't guarantee we'll hold together for much longer." Kira's mind raced, calculating the risks. "Avery, aim for their propulsion system next," she ordered. "If we disable their engines, they can't escape, and they won't be able to regroup." "Got it," Avery responded, adjusting the targeting systems. "Firing now." Another volley of blasts erupted from the Aegis, striking the flagship's engines. The flagship jerked violently, its propulsion system failing under the barrage. For a moment, there was silence. The flagship was crippled, but Kira knew better than to believe the fight was over. The enemy wouldn't give up that easily. "Captain," Avery said, her voice tense, "we've got another enemy force incoming. It looks like they've called for reinforcements. We won't be able to hold off two fleets at once." Kira's heart sank. She had hoped they would have more time, that the enemy fleet would be scattered and disorganized. But now, they were up against two waves of enemies. "How long do we have before they reach us?" "A few minutes," Avery replied. "The reinforcements are moving fast. We don't have much time." Kira's eyes darted to the screens. The Aegis was in no condition to fight two enemy fleets at once. They had already taken heavy damage, and their reserves were nearly gone. She knew they had only one option left. "Noah, can we make a jump?" Kira asked. "Can we make it out of here before the second fleet arrives?" "I can make it happen," Noah said, his voice strained. "But the engines are barely holding together. If we tried to jump now, there's a risk we could tear the ship apart." Kira gripped the edge of her console. "They couldn't fight forever, but if they jump now, they might survive." "We don't have a choice," she said. "Prepare for the jump. Do it now." Noah's fingers flew across his console, working frantically to reroute power to the jump drive. The tension in the air was palpable as the countdown began. Kira's pulse raced as she watched the enemy forces draw closer. 3 seconds, Noah called out, his voice steady despite the chaos. 2:1. The Aegis lurched, and the stars outside the viewport blurred into streaks of light. They were gone. The jump had been successful. The Aegis had escaped the battlefield, but for how long? Kira didn't know. She only knew one thing: they had to keep running. Hours later, as the Aegis drifted into a remote, uncharted system, Kira stood on the bridge, looking at the silent stars. The battle had been brutal, but they had survived. For now, the damage to the ship was extensive, but it was still operational. The crew had held together, and that was something to be proud of. "Captain," Avery's voice interrupted her thoughts. "We're in the clear. No sign of the enemy following us. For now, we're safe." Kira let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. They had made it, but the war wasn't over. They were only delaying the inevitable. The enemy would regroup, and they would come for the Aegis again. But for tonight, Kira allowed herself a small moment of peace. She had led her crew through one of the toughest battles of their lives, and they had come out victorious. It wasn't over yet, but they had made it this far. "Well done, everyone," Kira said, her voice filled with pride. "We survived. We'll fight again, but for now, let's rest. We've earned it." The crew began to relax, some of them letting out breaths of relief while others sat in silence, still processing everything that had happened. Kira's mind, however, was already racing ahead. She knew the war wasn't over, and there would be more battles to come. But tonight, they had won, and that was enough for now. As the crew began their repairs and settled in for a much-needed break, Kira walked to the observation deck. The stars outside were vast and unyielding. They were alone in this corner of the galaxy, but they had proven their strength. They had survived, but Kira knew the truth. The war was just beginning, and when it came, they would be ready. What will Kira and her crew face next? The war is far from over, and the true fight is only beginning. Will they survive the next wave of enemies? Will they find a way to turn the tide in their favor? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more intense space adventures and epic battles. What kind of stories would you like to see next? Comment below and tell us your favorite type of space story, and we'll create more videos based on your preferences.